Hi.
How are you?
Can you tell this is my first Instagram live? I don't
No,
even
it's
know how to
fine.
log into it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Like being in an online environment, like things happen. It's fine. Technical issues arise. It's okay.
I've never used it. I've never done this. So this is my first
Okay.
Instagram live with Go
Oh,
Live Girl.
perfect. Perfect. This is a perfect place to have your first Instagram live.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you so much again, Catherine, for the introduction.
Yes, thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, so tonight we have our very special guest, again, the current director for equity and inclusion at Greens Farms Academy in Westport, Connecticut. Everyone, please give a warm welcome and virtual applause to Shanelle Henry. Yay! Great, I'm so excited.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so let's get started.
All
So,
right.
tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to be a director of equity and inclusion.
Oh, sure. The short end of the story is that I found myself in college as an undergraduate, um, just a very angry student, right? I went to an all women's college, so, we were, in terms of gender, that was a level playing field, but found myself very quickly singled out as the Black girl. I'm from Brooklyn, so I was the Black kid from Brooklyn, right? I was working class. A lot of my peers, had more money and upper class and took extravagant trips, spring break, and all these different things that I didn't do. I couldn't afford things like that. And so there were many ways in which we were divided, but no one was talking about it, or I should say,
Mhm.
those conversations were not necessarily productive. Um, so, long story short, through college, I actually had an opportunity to take classes in social justice education, multicultural education. We weren't calling it equity and inclusion back then.
Yeah.
Um, but the language and terminology was the same. We talked about race, we talked about class, we talked about heterosexism. I didn't know that was a word at the time.
Oh
I
my
didn't know
God.
that. Yeah, had no idea. Talked about privilege. um, Found ways to have those discussions without fighting. um, there were times when it was painful, there were times when people got angry, but at the end of it all, we came out with, this idea of hope, this
Mhm.
idea of liberation, this idea of, we can talk about these things and understand each other and be okay. Um, so that was around my junior year of college. So senior year, when I, got back to school, I said, I want to do something about this, and became very active in student government and things like that on my campus, and decided to continue in education. And that's when I decided, I want to be a teacher. I want to be an educator. I want to go
Mhm.
out and talk to other people and other students and educate them about this, because there were other angry students walking around and no one was really communicating with one another. So fast forward, finding a career in this. I started out in higher education, working with college students, um, realizing they also didn't have the skills the way I lacked the skills, they were still lacking them. So wanted to go back, take the timeline back and say, where does the education really need to start? We can't wait till college.
Yeah,
We can't
exactly.
wait till college when you show up and have a roommate who's different from you in so many different ways for the first time, and you don't know how to communicate with that person or get along
Mhm.
with that person. So that's what kind of brought me to this field, and brought me to the K-12 arena because I wanted to work with younger people.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So can you talk about GFA's commitment to building and nurturing an inclusive environment? So, primarily with the students and staff and their relationship, the curriculum, and just overall how to GFA builds their inclusive community.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, GFA's mission talks about engaging students as partners, in this inclusive, innovative, globally minded community. We talk about educating them to build and create lives of purpose. So the mission certainly spoke to me, in the work that I do. But also, when I interviewed for this position at GFA, as much as they were interviewing me, I was interviewing them. I was interviewing the
Mhm.
school. I was
Yeah.
interviewing the students. I was interviewing the faculty and staff because I really wanted to get a true sense of the institution and was it living up to this, audacious mission.
Mhm.
Um, Not that I expected them to have everything 100% right.
Yeah.
No one's perfect, no institution is perfect, but usually on interviews or, I think about admissions days, we put on our best selves. We put on
Yes.
our best, give you the best show possible. And I wanted to see behind the curtain, kind of lift the veil and see, okay, what was it really like here? But GFA was honest with me and saying, we're not getting it right all the time. We've stumbled, we've tried and failed, and we want to be better. And so having the opportunity to not only teach and work with students, but, you know, have these conversations with our faculty, give them the resources that not only they need, but they're asking for. To me, that
Mhm.
was key. They are asking, what can I do to, have these conversations with my students? What can I do differently or better in the classroom? That lesson didn't go so well. What could I have done differently there? Can you help me? Right?
Yeah.
All of those things happen. Same with admissions, being willing to go out of our comfort zones, out of our bubbles, out of the areas we are used to being in to, cultivate other types of opportunities for students to get to know who we are, and see us as an option. Because I always tell families, just because you don't think GFA is for you, don't rule us out,
Yeah.
right? And really go through the process, see how far you get through the process, ask all the questions, until you get the answers.
That's so important. That's great. Sherry even said it down below. She said, "Love the honesty. We all need to be asking those questions." I think that's so important. Just kind of, I guess, recapping all of that. What do you think schools in general need to do more of to achieve an inclusive community?
Certainly, if we think about diversity in and of itself, I consider diversity to be a given. We are a diverse community. We can, lament about the fact that we're not as diverse as we'd like to be,
Hmm.
right? We can certainly be more diverse, but just on its face, we are a diverse institution. We are more diverse in our school community than in some of the surrounding communities.
Yeah.
But what do we do with that diversity? What do we do once everyone gets to our school and inside the walls and inside the classrooms? And so cultivating this culture of belonging, cultivating this, sense of inclusion, making sure that what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do is to get students to have those conversations and build the skills that I saw were so lacking in myself as a young person and in the young people
Hmm.
that I was working with. I hear from our students now, you know, not just about politics and the election, but around all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It can be uncomfortable. And so students who are afraid to speak up or to share their views, how do we get them to, lean into that discomfort and work through the fear, or, the anxiety of saying the wrong thing, or, even teach people how to respond. It's not just
Yeah.
about I said the wrong thing, but if someone says something you disagree with, how do you respond respectfully, right? Everyone's
Yeah.
entitled to their beliefs and their opinions. How do you communicate across the aisle when that happens? So
Yeah.
I
That's
see that as the work.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love that. So how have you facilitated understanding of what it means to be Black in white spaces? Like how do you make sure that all voices are heard within school, and just how do you maintain that inclusive environment within school?
Thinking about that, on multiple levels. The first level for me is showing up, right? I
Yeah.
show up as Black in white spaces every day. And so,
Yeah.
how do I do that? How do I articulate that? How do I express that or explain that to other people? And so, there's that aspect of it. Being willing to ask and answer questions, whether it's, about hair or personality, mannerisms, about where you're from, in addition to beliefs, right? So there's that very basic level, and that can be where microaggressions come in sometimes.
Yeah.
And I talk to folks about that, and getting them to understand not only what it is, but again, how to respond when it happens, because you never know. People don't know what they don't know,
Yeah.
right? And so it's going to happen. But I also think about, you know, for our faculty to talk to them about what this means for our students, recognizing that they too are Black in these white spaces. And so how they're showing up, is it our implicit bias and the lens through which we see them, who we think they are, or what we think we're seeing, um, how they're engaging with the curriculum or not? Because I hear from our students all the time, particularly students of color, that, you know, they're not reflected in various ways in our curriculum. They're not reflected enough, right? That one book we read, or, you know, we only talk about civil rights or slavery, and what about the rest of the diaspora? We hear that, right? And so working with our faculty to address that when those voices are raised.
Yeah, that's great. I love that as well. I'm actually going to quote you here. You've said that, quote, racial equity work is and should be disorienting. It is about becoming comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations about race and racism. So can you expand on that and tell our audience like what you mean by that?
Sure. When that happens, right, when the conversation gets uncomfortable, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work is messy. These
Yeah.
conversations are messy. They are hard. They are uncomfortable. And when that happens, to stay in the conversation. So I mentioned my time as an undergraduate in college and thinking about when I took that class, and when we were talking about race, when we were talking about gender, right? I went to a
Mhm.
women's college talking about gender. When we were talking about um, class, any identity of mine that we say is a marginalized identity, right? I was articulate, I was well versed, I had something to say, right? Especially about
Mhm.
race. I could talk about race all day. However, when we switch the conversation to areas where identities where I had privilege, Christian privilege, heterosexual privilege, able bodied privilege, right? I was quiet. I
Mm.
didn't have much to say. I didn't talk a lot, but I listened. And that was the key. I didn't shut down. I didn't walk out, walk away, turn away. I was quiet, but I was listening because I was learning. And it was uncomfortable. It was hard. The hardest thing for me was to recognize that in my privileged identities, there are ways in which I marginalized and oppressed other people, right? As a heterosexual person, not recognizing my heterosexual privilege, that I could
Mhm.
oppress the members of the LGBTQ community, that hurt me, right? I said,
Mhm.
how dare I, when I knew how it felt as a Black person, right? When I was suffering microaggressions or had racist incidents happen to me, how angry and hurt that made me. How dare I do that to someone else based on their marginalized identity? So, in those moments, to sit with that, sit with the guilt, sit with the pain, and learn and listen.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think Chelsea said, she asked me, have I ever experienced tough conversations with peers? All the time. I have, previously I had a white suite mate, and it was hard sometimes because, you know, like there's always differences, there's cultural differences. And I think coming together and having conversations are how we move forward. You can't really do anything if you're not talking and, you know, like being uncomfortable. And I think that's something that everyone needs to hear. It's okay to be uncomfortable. Like these conversations need to happen or else we're going to be moving backwards. We can't do that, especially right now in this current time. um just to continue, do you have any advice for someone who wants to help support diversity and inclusion initiatives as a student?
Absolutely. You know, if you can start clubs, you know, at your school, you know, again, coming back to that dialogue and creating conversations, spaces, opening up spaces and opportunities to have the dialogue, educating yourself first and foremost, right? Understanding who you are as a person, you know, whether it's multiple identities, whether it's beliefs, ideologies, but understanding who you are and then inviting other people to the table to have these discussions, seeking out other people in the community who might help you with your own education, you know, if there's something you want to learn more about. But, you know, really taking the opportunity to seize that moment. And
Mhm.
it might be scary, and there might be times when no one joins you. That can be the hardest. You open
Yeah.
up the space and no one joins you, right? Because they don't want to, again, say the wrong thing. Or I think if I come to this meeting, it's only going to be folks who are on this side. Um, really being able to work with and through that, but not being afraid to kind of put yourself out there. It involves taking a risk.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So what do you think we need to see in both private and public schools as well to help uplift these diversity and inclusion initiatives? I'm sure a lot of people on here have been in both private and public schools. So what can you give for those people who want to learn more?
If you are an educator, for example, and even for students who can, talk to their teachers or their administrators about the curriculum, right? Give them the feedback that's necessary around um, talking about different types of races, cultures, experiences in the curriculum. So we're not just telling one story, one narrative, right? But thinking
Mm,
about multiple perspectives, thinking about who's missing from our curriculum or from, you know, what perspective are we telling this history? Whose history is it that we're telling? So to be able to start with an examination of your curriculum, which is something that we're doing at GFA right now, it is something that I think even when I interviewed, faculty talked about, and change is slow.
mhm.
We've been moving. I've been at GFA for 3 years now. We've been moving ever so slowly towards examining curriculum, making small
Mhm,
changes here and there. But this summer, we heard from students that small changes were not enough. We need to do
mhm.
more. We need to move quicker. And so we're currently engaged in a process now where we're examining how we talk about race in our curriculum.
Oh, that's awesome. I love to hear that. That's great. So what do you think are the best resources for people? I guess books, websites, for people that want to have these conversations, but they're not sure where to begin.
Google. And I say that jokingly and seriously at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. If you Google talking about race, there is
Mm-hmm.
so much that comes up. That is the number one question I get, especially number one question I got this summer after, we witnessed the murder of George Floyd and people just all over wanting to do something, read something. Can you give me a resource? Can you give me a book? What do I do? What do I read? And you can start with Google, because if you Google anti-bias resources talking about race and racism, how to respond or talk about police violence, diversity, equity, and inclusion, any kind of keyword you can think of,
Yeah.
you will find multiple reading lists. Um, One of my favorite books that I've been just recommending to anyone and everyone who asks, and even when they don't, because it
Mm-hmm.
just really resonated with me this year, is The Person You Mean to Be by Dolly Chugg. It's the person you mean to be, how good people can fight bias. And it is a very simple, yet relatable, practical book, just about, we all think of ourselves as good people, yet we all make mistakes because this work is messy. These conversations are messy. And so,
Yeah.
what do you do when that happens? How do you push through that? How do you see your blind spots? So anyone who wants to start, and students can read it too. It's a very easy read, and they might see themselves reflected in it in some of the experiences that she talks about. She's a college professor herself, and she talks about experiences with students in the classroom. So current students might actually recognize some of that and say, "Yeah, that's happened to me too." So that is something I think is a good place to start.
That's great. Yeah, I'm sure everybody on the live is very excited and happy to start working because I think that's where it is. Like we have to
Yeah.
start working. You have to start somewhere. Oh, somebody said the bootstrap section of that book was so powerful. Great recommendation. That's awesome. That's great. We have to go pick that up then. That's awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me. This was such a great conversation. I'm so happy that you joined and that we had a couple of your students also join. That's really cool and really great. Again, thank you so much, Miss Henry, for everything
You're
that you've done.
welcome. I'm glad I was able to figure it out.
Yeah. That's fine though. Again, like we're all working through this. It's online. It's hard. It's totally fine.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good night.
Bye. Okay, everybody. Yay! That went so well. So I'm going to plug our next Listen Learn Act, which will be Tuesday, December 8th. We're going to be doing a What's Next post-election racial hearing. You'll be hearing from speakers Akia Callum, who works with the Connecticut NAACP, April Harvin, who's a behavioral health professional and administrator, and psychotherapist. And it'll be moderated by Fatu Niang. And I'm so excited for that. It'll be via Zoom. It'll be streaming on LinkedIn and Facebook. Again, that'll be Tuesday, December 8th from 4 to 5. I'm so happy to have had this conversation with Ms. Henry, and I'm so excited for the next Listen, Learn, Act series. Thank you guys so much for joining. Have a great night. Bye, guys.